Thank you for being here. Thanks for everybody for joining us. This is what now? I think our fourth conversation. So excited to have this, and so excited for Asif Bhatti. Did I do it correctly? I think I did.
Asif Bhatti.
I did totally wrong. Thank you, Asif. Asif Bhatti. Joining us, and it's crazy. So this is our fourth conversation, or my fourth in this series. But I think you're actually the first person that agreed to do this several months ago. So thank you for that. So Asif is the Director of Strategy and Innovation at the American Frontier Fund. He is also a former member of the Biden-Harrison transition team. And before that, or probably during that time, was with McKinsey & Company. Am I capturing all that correct?
Separate from, yeah.
Gotcha.
I left the consulting life a handful of years ago and joined the transition, the administration, and now America's Frontier Fund. So
that's great. Well, good. And DC based, right? Most of the time.
That's right. Absolutely.
Well, good. Well, again, so excited for you to take the time to be with us today as we gotta explore these intersections of all things AI, education, and I'm super excited to talk to you today, not only about kind of educational implications, but workforce implications, right? Because you're kind of on the front lines of what this looked like and what this means and trends in this industry. But as we jump in, I'd love to start this with everybody. It's a common experience that we all have. Tell me, if you don't mind, before we get into the kind of topic for today, what was school like for you? What was school like? What were your experiences?
So maybe just to paint some color here for myself as well. I hop between public and private. I think almost every switch from elementary to middle to high school. And I think the experience there that I'll say is that there was a element of, in certain classrooms, where curiosity and questioning was prioritized over just the curriculum. And that, I think, in my experience, especially I remember my 8th grade teacher, this was in the US, in fact, where she was particularly attuned to allowing for, I don't know what the technical term is, but like learning based off of past knowledge. And so you have these nodes of knowledge you have already, and then allowing for questions to kind of bridge into the new topic areas. And this was in science specifically. And I think that year, I, as a student, probably performed my best as a middle school 8th grader. But it was really just a function of the Socratic kind of dialogue that the teacher had, despite 25 other students in my classroom. I think that's the most memorable. I think more broadly, where I think schools become formative and kind of brought me to where I am now, the engineering curriculum in college. I was a biomedical engineer, a data scientist afterwards, that I've done nothing of the sort with my career. I think that curriculum still re-emphasizes this, like, how do you take large problems and break them down into component pieces and ask a set of questions for the set of variables you need to solve for, whether it's in a matrix theory class or at a biomedical chemistry engineering lab. Like, you have to ask the right set of questions to be able to get to an answer. And so I think, going back to your question, like, what was school like for me? It really was this kind of development of a skill of curiosity, conceptual problem solving, and writing, and getting to questions that are the ones that help drive towards an answer versus rote memorization or any other kind of type of learning experience. So hopefully I answered your question, Josh.
Oh yeah, that's great. No, and it's interesting too, because kind of the way that you characterize your memory of school and what was most impactful. Earlier, we had Dr. Chris Deedy, who's a senior research fellow with Harvard Graduate School of Education. And essentially, he described what you just did as what we need to be doing, and what actually, in many ways, technology will allow for more inquiry, more conversation, versus replacing it or outdating it. So that's great. That's great. So as we jump into this, if you don't mind, kind of from your vantage point, from more of a kind of an industry, finance, trends kind of seat, to begin this conversation, will you define for me, when you say the term AI, or for the purpose of this conversation, what does that mean to you? How do you define that?
Yeah, I mean, maybe let's start with the AI meaning artificial intelligence, intelligence meaning cognition and decision making, I guess, and that exists in, say, the non-artificial form or the natural form within our minds. We take a problem and we try to deduce hypotheses from it. We test and learn, and we get to an understanding. Artificial would then just be that a computer has that same form of intelligence to deduce insight, to come to insight, to come to an answer quickly, whether that's 2 times 2 or the laws of physics as another example. It is just how you come to insight or come to an answer through what is non-artificial, that which is our mind and as humans, versus what computers might be able to do. And I think we are at an intersection where previously human minds were able to compute at peak performance across anything, whether it was a computer itself or in the animal kingdom. Like our brains, our frontal cortex is the really distinct element of what brings us as a species to this quote term of intelligence. Now that I think is being complemented by what we have with AI or LLMs or language learning models that are kind of taking all the information we have in the world and deriving that same insight through artificial intelligence. So hopefully that helps.
No, yeah, that's super helpful. And kind of to that point, I wanted to ask, I read something that you had written, I think, and posted on LinkedIn about kind of a brief history of AI, if you will. And this idea of, and correct me if I'm wrong in any of this understanding, but there was a point where we tried to recreate the way the brain worked, essentially, through neural networks or these neural connections. And am I right that when you talk about large language models, that's a bit of a shift in how we are creating this artificial intelligence? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so I think, I'm not I'm not one of the scientists who ended up doing this, but there was just, again, going back to the point of intelligence, how do we actually codify using code to map out how our neurons work and how we take visual input, verbal or audible input, as well as sensory, and compute some type of insight from it. And so, yeah, neural nets were one approach, and there's a number of approaches that I think I started to talk about. The reason that large language models have, I think, really gained a lot of popularity is the internet is a bunch of data, and computers have to go and label it, which to the effect means that they have to know, okay, this is a number, but that this number specifically is an integer. It also has to know all the other things that in elementary school you learn about numbers and label that data set to that regard. Similarly, if it's a picture, it has to be able to parse that and label those things. And so large language models are actually been outperforming in that data labeling for then the end use of a random forest or any data science model that you might use. It's the labeling that's been incredibly distinctive. And I'll give you 2 companies that have done that, which one of which we all know, OpenAI. Their catapult or their jump was because of the fact that they used large language models to label their information versus, say, Scale AI, which was using a different type of technology to label data, and that didn't perform necessarily as well as what was with LLMs. And in turn, now I think we're realizing that the way computers might think differently might give that extra boost that surpasses human cognition. And I think that's where there are some fears, which I know we'll get into shortly, but that distinction of how you label information such that a computer can process it is where we are finding the importance of AI. So
yeah, that's super interesting. And to your point, we'll get into all this, but I think it's also, from somebody who doesn't have a great depth of understanding of this or background, the fact that even as we make this progress, we haven't invented something. We are continuing to innovate how this is accomplished, if you were right. Because as a kind of a layman, I kind of think of it, oh, we built a machine, the machine can do this thing. But it's more that we are continuing to figure out how to get to an output. I had read something about, with artificial intelligence, there was a time when we were trying to replicate the way humans thought. And we're coming to realize we don't need to do that that has to be the goal, as long as the output is as good or better or faster.
We always assumed that humans had the best way of approaching a problem, and there may be other similarly good ways, which of course large language models is just one of those other good ways.
Yeah, and to me that's and we'll circle back to this, I think, but that's kind of the existential kind of thought of all this. Is it's not to your point, it's the way that we thought we had this, we assumed it was supreme and it was the only way and the best way, and we are waking up to find that there might be different ways that are actually more effective, more efficient, which is crazy. But before we get into that, if you don't mind for a moment, a lot of our audience tends to be educators.
Yes.
So would you explain for a moment what you do? What is it that you do, and kind of your ties to this industry?
Sure. So I guess I'll start off with I academically have studied biomedical engineering, chemistry, and data science. So especially in that last one on the data science, I think there's an innate understanding of how information can be incredibly empowering to any industry. And so in my career, I've spent about half a decade in a management consultancy, where that pretty much was me going across industry to industry, looking at various problem sets for businesses, whether it was a higher education institution, a public service or public sector agency, or a bank or a telecommunications company. They were all looking to say, how do we serve our customer, our students, our custodial population, our social benefit recipients better? And how do we do that potentially through data? And so a lot of that first half of my career was using advanced analytics and data science models to actually look at, I'll give one example for an unemployment agency. How do we better identify folks who really need unemployment benefits versus the folks who are fraudulently claiming it, or frankly are fake individuals, or there's some criminal activity there as well. And so how do you discern that through information in order to help public sector agencies or unemployment agencies better identify who are the real high need people and get them their checks versus the ones who are probably flagged and we need to double check on. On the flip side, with education, I think that's the same thing, where historically we've used standardized tests, we use grades, and when it comes to decisions like college admissions, it is the same set of data that we want to get on a particular learner or student to be able to discern like what is the best kind of major or university or institution that they would participate in if they choose to go to college. And so where I come into is now I've spent half a decade just hopping between those various industries using data science models and AI models to help them, and now articulating that back into, as an investor at America's Frontier Fund, where are the areas where society is going to truly transform? And so just very briefly on America's Frontier Fund, we are an organization that was a function of the National Security Commission for Artificial Intelligence. A lot of our senior leadership is actually from there. That's one of the reports, in fact, that I would potentially look at reading. It was very keenly focused on national security, but what the underlying realization was that AI is not just the only technology that's going to change our world. It's going to be semiconductors. It's going to be advanced energy, advanced materials. And so across a number of what I call deep tech sectors, we at AFF look at them, understand them. We have a lot of deeply technical individuals on our science and technology team that understand where the 10-year vision could be, and using that to then, I guess, ultimately see what are the steps to that vision. AI is just one sector that in particular has become very important over the last half decade, but there are many other sectors that are running parallel to AI that will actually provide that same transformation to education, to traditional business, to healthcare, et cetera. So a lot of my time day to day is spent looking from a technical standpoint, like what are those steps? How do they shift kind of the dynamics of the world, of the markets, of geopolitical situations, and then trying to take some of the capital we may have and invest it into fantastic companies and startups.
Thank you. That's super helpful. So, you essentially are looking 10, 15, 20 years down the road and trying to ascertain what is going to be consequential, what might even be revolutionary in terms of technology, and how do we, from an investment standpoint, further that, and then certainly, obviously benefit from that. Is that right? Is that fair?
Absolutely. And as an investor, I think that's what the most investors or venture capitalists do, is they look at like what's going to be crazy transformative. So if you look at Google, Facebook, like Amazon as an example, it was early investors, that VC investors that saw that the promise for change, or the promise for shopping online differently, or engaging with people differently, that they took their dollar, and though it's risky, they invested into those companies, and now we know them to be the large tech companies that they are. Similarly, in other industries like AI and like semiconductors or advanced energy, advanced material, there are going to be incredible changes there that will shift again the way that the way the world works. Similar to for any history teachers on here, the Industrial Revolution may have done that, or the invention of the wheel or the fire may have done that. Every so often, there's a wave of innovation that just kind of becomes the set of underlying platforms that then new industries and new workforces are developed off of. So
this is interesting to me. So am I right to say that you are suggesting that this kind of large systematic revolutionary change, whatever we want to refer to it as, AI will be a piece of it, but it's actually kind of this synergy of multiple innovations that are, again, I'm sure complementary in some ways, but that are, we're at a period where it's not just one thing, it's multiple things that are.
Yeah. So let me give a tangible example of what I mean there. We all probably saw the really cool Apple AR headset. AR VR has been around for almost now a decade, and the adoption of VR as like a mechanism, virtual reality rather, sorry, I'll use full form of my abbreviations, but the adoption has been low. And why has it been low is because the hardware is bulky, and for our science teachers, like any science teacher, if you have bulky weight on your head, you're going to add strain to your neck. You're physiologically, it's not going to be used for as long as it may need to. And so what could change is you have a virtual reality headset, you have all the access to the internet, and you can type and compute, use calculators or whatever. But if that thing shrinks, then maybe it's a contact lens or it's a pair of glasses, right? And that comes through innovation in the semiconductor chip design, the hardware technologies, the battery technology that's being used, and the convergence of energy, chips, AI. All three can become incredibly powerful for a simple tool that then, say I'm talking to you, Josh, or I'm getting coffee with you, I know kind of on the side, like, oh, this is what he was tweeting like 2 days ago, so this may be a relevant conversation. Or my personal AI is just pinging me, hey, you have another meeting in 30 minutes, but you haven't eaten lunch, so should we order you lunch already? So you start to see how things fold into kind of the existence we have already, and that being a function of semiconductors, artificial intelligence, and other hardware technology areas kind of converging. And that could happen, optimistically, in the next 10 years, maybe. Maybe we're not there yet, but also could be faster than that. It's a little tough, tough to put a timeline to how this really starts to change the way we live.
Wow. But the idea that we're all going to live in Ready Player One is not as extravagant as it might have been 5 years ago. That's crazy. That's crazy. All right. So to that point too, I know you and I have talked, and I've read some stuff that you've written about, kind of really AI for good, right? Because we I think wrongly we dichotomize this conversation if it's good or it's bad, it's transformative or it's destructive. But yeah. I know you've talked, and this idea that AI can have huge social transformation, right? Beyond just being able to know what you tweeted, 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
How else do you see this kind of potentially impacting society?
Yeah, so I wrote an article about this on LinkedIn, and I think the one principle that a colleague of mine actually, when we were talking, we discovered was the Baumol effect, which I won't I may not recount it properly, but the idea is that society over time has become more productive, and so productivity can come through things like the manufacturing line or the Industrial Revolution, or through the use of internet, or through the founding of the calculator, anything like that makes things we had to do, like review of literatures in the library, to now using the internet to do that same research. It cuts the cycle of learning pretty significantly. And so what that has also done is, say, in consumer goods, like when you buy a toothbrush or toothpaste, it's made that price cheaper relative to the cost of other goods as well. And this is generally true, excluding inflation. But where it hasn't been able to do that is where there's resource constraints. And so you see healthcare costs have gone really high. You've seen education costs have also gone exponentially higher and higher, and then the amount of student debt that students have, especially on the higher education side. And that's just a function of, as society got more productive, those sectors weren't able to stay as productive as some of the others. And so while toothpaste is really cheap now, it takes to make like 1,000 tubes of toothpaste, it takes like half a day or maybe a couple hours, where it used to take perhaps a day and a half of like people manually like injecting those tubes. And that being equated to, it takes a day and a half to read a book or something in an education setting. In the education setting, that's still the case maybe, whereas on the manufacturing and other sector side, that isn't. And the reason I say that is that what AI does, it's a generalized productivity boost to all sectors, and especially the sectors that haven't seen those boosts. Let me, I guess, double click into education and what that could look like. I started off with like my school experience was, what I remember about it was the fact that curiosity-based learning or Socratic questioning was actually were moments that stood out in my mind, and frankly probably put a level of distinction in how I approach the world versus how somebody else does. And the importance there is that now with AI, learning can be enabled at scale through that. So what I mean is that if a student has a question about PEMDAS, like order of operations, right? And it's a new concept to them, how can you actually track their learning into a new topic area through things they know already in the past? And Khan Migo, as one example with Khan Academy, is actually starting to do that, where they're taking experiences or data points about a student's learning journey and then using that to extrapolate how they can learn in other topic areas as well. So I was a very bad history student. I just couldn't remember history because oftentimes it wasn't question based. It was just, you got to remember it. But I was really good at math and science. And so there are ways now that at least a teacher in their classroom can tune themselves to that student's learning journey. And I think Khan Migo is a fantastic example of this, which it just excites me, because now when a student does homework at home, they may ask like, hey, what's 2 + 2? Khan Migo is not going to tell them 2 + 2. They're going to say, hey, remember like last week in class, we learned what multiplication does, or we learned order of operations, like if it's 2 + 2, 2 × 2 + 3. And so when you have that student is guided through it. And if they're still pausing, it at least for the teacher at a classroom level can say, here are your students that like individually aren't tracking towards what we've learned or where the rest of the class is. And here's the set of students that are already excelling in a way that is incredibly empowering for that teacher, so that they can either give a little bit more attention to that one student or provide a little bit more of an individualized curriculum to that student. And that doesn't mean necessarily having to go sit down with them and teaching over multiple hours. It could just mean you have a paced learning for those students. And schools already started to do that as well. I know in my middle school, there was like a advanced, a gifted program for students who were a little bit ahead in certain classes, whether it was math or the whole curriculum at large as well. And so the schools have done that at large in mass. Now it can go to the individual student level where, say, if a student is 3 or 4 months ahead in math class, what's to say that we don't use that time to kind of push them along further, right? And provide that student with that individualized curriculum. And that doesn't mean that, hey, there's going to be the ones that are like now a year out already and outperforming. I think many ways where it becomes really good is students learn at different paces at different points in time, because different things are happening around them. Maybe the school musical and track, cross-country practice have taken all their time and they're not able to do their homework. And so academically, they're maybe a little bit more slower or less at pace, right? But another semester, another year, they have that time and availability and they can operate a little bit faster. And so AI, and I'm not doing a good job here necessarily, but it allows teachers to really be able to tune the pace at which learning happens and not have to worry about the whole classroom of saying, this is the curriculum I have to go through, but rather say that here are the topics or skills or things we have to learn, and pace it at this individual student level. Let me pause there so let you allow you to ask a question and see if I made it.
That is so great. There's so many things you just said that resonate. First, I wrote down generalized productivity boost just because I like that. But so much. So a couple of things. One is there's all this concern that AI could replace or somehow disenfranchise teachers. And what I really appreciate about your description is it's much more of an empowering narrative, right? That suddenly as teachers, we're going to have so much more individualized information to kind of help set and guide versus being replaced, right? So it really is this augmentation idea, which I really appreciate. And then I also think, to your point, I hadn't really thought about, and I like the idea that you're in the school play, or it's 2 weeks before the track meet, or your parents are getting a divorce, or whatever it is that is this huge distraction, this ability to potentially just be responsive, right, to what's happening in life. And I think we as educators, and I think in general, I don't think we fully appreciate what time could mean in education, because right now it is so standardized. I mean, there's really no reason that right now kids are on summer break, and are now they've left third and going to fourth, or et cetera, whatever it is. That there's really nothing magical about that. That's just a system that was put in place. So it's kind of a fascinating idea to even think there might be a time where completing our education might be so individualized that we do work through summers, or, it's a 12-year process for me, it's a 10-year process for you, it's a 14-year process for you, just based on all these different factors. And I really also appreciate this idea of, you're right, so much of it, you can be in the gifted class, or you can't be in the gifted class. And and usually you're in all gifted, or you're in all, and this idea that maybe just World War II is a place where you just have such background knowledge and passion that you accelerate. So that all really.
I want to add two things. One, the Walton family did a survey. I think it came out in March of this year. They interviewed about 1,000 people, teachers, K through 12, and students as well, talking about the use of ChatGPT. A majority of teachers said that they were using ChatGPT already, about 51%, and it being higher in use with Black and Latino teachers specifically. And then in terms of the impact, a bulk, like I think it was 88% of them said that it has a net positive impact on the learning experience of students in the classroom, as well as individual students saying it helps me learn as well. So I think with educators, where traditional classrooms, like you said, were like, here's gifted program, here's not gifted program, here's English class, here's math class, right? Now it's not going to be necessarily like write a 12-page paper about Napoleonic wars or the Napoleonic era, right? It's not going to be that. It doesn't have to be. Already, like in the real world, like people don't read 12-page papers. Like I'll tell you about the national security, the report on AI, right? That's a very large report, and very few people have read it fully. It's always the executive summary. So I think the learning and frankly the way that the education system has to teach students will change in a very great, fantastic, positive way. Maybe to shift into one other area where I talked about generalizable productivity boost. I think there's a concept of even in workforce where white collar workers are now kind of also having that same fear of like, will this replace me? AI will not replace people. People using AI will replace people. Why? Because again, you get productivity boosts for those individuals who are using it in a generalizable function. So if you think about in a workplace, I have my graphic designer, I have my communications person, I have my business analyst, and I have my finance team. And I'm like the strategist, right? Thinking about like what's the big problems in the next quarter or the next year. I now don't necessarily need the communications person to specifically just always work my words. If they're not available, I can kind of dip into that skill set through artificial intelligence and get to a baseline that's not perfect, that then my specialist from the communications team can actually be like, okay, like this, don't like this, this is good, this is not good, this is not good. And you start to then, as an individual in that workspace, be able to kind of track your individual capabilities across teams in like a T formation with a specific vertical going down into what your specialty is. So then on my finance colleagues side, say they need to communicate like a complex financial model, and they're like, I've never been effective about communicating complex financial metrics, but maybe AI can help them articulate, this is the way I would talk about this Excel model that you've built. And if it needs to go to the board, then again, as a finance person, you've dipped into a capability that, say, traditionally lies within your comms team, but you still go to that comms team to refine it, to evolve it, to sand the edges with a finer piece of sandpaper. So what that really means is, historically, we've really been like expertise, like vertical expertise. You are the person who knows this one thing. Now the creative generalist, I think, is exceptional. It's the era of the creative generalist, where if you can take copy or a narrative you wrote as a writer, and also be able to create videography for it or animation for it, that's incredible, because you can create a whole movie within hours in your home. And folks are doing that with Midjourney as one example. It allows you, the generalist, to be incredibly creative in a way and create so much value very quickly, and then tap into specific expertise areas when they need it. And what that then means is, going back to, if you are a generalist, you need to be able to know to ask the right questions, right? You need to be able to know, frankly, you need to be tuned to be asking questions across the entire journey, versus just saying, I know actually from my experience and from my expertise, this is the way we do it. When you ask those questions of AI or of others, you actually get to a collective answer, a better answer. I'm trying to put a tangible example to what I mean there. So if I'm an educator, if I'm a teacher, right, and I have all of my students submitting feedback on a curriculum through a Google form, and I don't have I have like 100 students. I don't have the time to read necessarily all of them. Can I use, like, if I had a data science team in my school, maybe I could give it to the data science team, and then they could like process it and give me all the great, wonderful insights of like, this is what your students are talking about. But maybe actually now as a teacher, I could say, I don't need that. Let me try the first cut by going into an AI that could help me create that code I need to take all those Google forms and do natural language processing myself to say, this is the insight that's coming from the 100 people, or the 100 students rather, that have told me about the last school year. And that can be done all within a day. It's like 6 hours, right? that's where I'm talking about, like, a teacher is not a data scientist, but they could be if they needed to be.
Yeah. So much of what you just said is kind of blowing my mind. So yeah, I love that idea. So when you talk about the ability or so we're this creative generalist, I love that term, and the ability to ask questions. And tell me if I'm thinking about this right. So right now, when I get on ChatGPT or I'm doing it, I find the limitation is not the technology; it's my ability to ask it the right question of what to do, right? And so we as teachers, as anyone in the workforce, the opportunity of what we can produce ourselves is going to be so much higher. We have to kind of get a new mindset. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I'll try to be brief here. CEOs are well regarded for organizations. Why? CEOs don't necessarily always have the answer. They have the vision, but they don't have the answer. They build their team around them to help them get to the specific answer. And what they are exceptional at is asking the right questions of their team members. When you ask a set of questions to, say, your product team, of saying like, oh, well, tell me why we couldn't just make this a one button click. Like, what's the limitation there, right? Or tell me why this dashboard looks like this. Like, this is confusing, right? And this obviously changes in a higher level setting, but asking those questions makes for a great CEO, and having the vision to where you want to get to and asking the questions that may lead you to that vision makes you a great CEO. So now I would say any one person can be that great CEO for whatever that setting might be, if that's a classroom, or if it's writing a TV show, or if it's doing work in a corporate American job. You have to be able to ask those questions. And that's where with ChatGPT, the hallucinations and all the cons that come of it. I think there's a new way we have to learn how to use this technology in a way that supports our workflows. And so whether that specifically means, I don't want ChatGPT to scrape the whole internet because it's going to create fake facts for me. Don't do that. I'm going to give you 4 articles that I have found relevant, I've read, and I want you to limit your data set to these 4 articles and tell me, how would you build a problem set tree for me to better understand the AI market, or what considerations should I have when using AI in a classroom, and build me like a decision tree of questions, right? And so it's whatever the thing you're asking ChatGPT, I think there's a learning on how we tune it, how we set it with the data we want, and then also telling it what we expect back as a return. I think if I go to the top tier consultancies as one example, they're not screening at the early associate or analyst level for that smartest person. They're screening for their ability to conceptually problem solve. Can they do that in a structured way, and can they communicate in a top-down manner? The 3 skills actually become incredibly powerful, because that way of approaching a problem as one it becomes universally applicable for whatever problem area you're trying to go to. And I think that in an education setting, being able to say, could have a good conceptual problem solving skill set, being structured and being top down in your communication, and saying like, I will give you this, I expect this, and if I miss something, ask me another set of questions. Those AIs then will perform much better to support the individual or the teacher or whoever it is.
And yes, again, a little bit mind blown. And even as you describe this, as for example, let's not, go through the whole entire internet to try to figure this out. Here's 3 articles, that's all. We could do that now, right? That's not technology that's going to come down there. We can do that right now with a $20 subscription to GPT-4.
That's right. Yeah. So, I mean, I do this all the time where I'm like, I have like a AI typing up all my notes for my meetings, right? Or for conversations. And I say, okay, here are the conversations that I've had with 6 people. And I want you to tell me, like, what are the 6 biggest points, or what are the next steps, or what are the action items? And that's in my workflow. I'm trying to think in a student's workflow. It could be, here are 6 papers that our teacher asked us to read. I want to understand what they're saying, summarized in a way that is simple language, because these are technical science reports and I don't understand the research behind this. So translate this for me in simple language, or translate it and summarize it, right? So that you start to limit it. And what you're doing is, I'll go back to my engineering degree. I had to read like these papers that frankly I just didn't understand, and I just had to memorize them at that point. But in order for me to understand them, I could just say, here's the science journal that I need to read. Can you like translate this into just like 5th grade English, or simple words, so that I can understand the engineering design behind things? And then you start to learn. You can actually say, okay, actually, I understand this now. What was that technical term that was being used, or what was that concept that was being used? As just another example.
Yeah, I love that. I talked to a gentleman named Martin McKay, who's CEO of TextHelp, and he talks about AI is going to give us a dial for all content, and so that we can say, bring this down, to a, because in education, especially in the world of reading, we talk about number one predictor of comprehension is your prior knowledge. So to simplify something to then build up is huge. I want to go back for a second to something you said that, again, I'm going to take with me, and I want to make sure I heard it right. Going back, you said AI will not replace people. People using AI will replace people. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's got huge implications, right? Huge. Even the way you described kind of those skills that like a McKinsey's looking for or whatnot, even kind of prior to this, and it's even going to be exasperated, is so different than how traditional education works, right? Traditional education is not about generating questions. It's about responding and having the right answer to a very contained, predicted, there's a test, there's a correct answer, there's a right or wrong answer, and so on and so forth. But so I think that's huge. But even this idea of people using AI will replace people, am I right too that that's not this aspirational statement that's going to be 10, 15 years from now? Like I remember when I was a kid, we were always supposed to learn Japanese because the Japanese economy is going to take over the world and so on and so forth. But this is something that's kind of happening now. Is that fair to say that this is, or now being the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, how long the change takes, I'll say it might take a generation, just because, it took a generation for us to get comfortable with this, and then using it in the way that we do. So it could take as long as that, or it could be shorter. Frankly, some of the work the AI Commission had done, they thought that where we are right now with AI would have happened 5 years from now. So it's faster, right? So admittedly, I think it could be. What I would say is that the use of AI it's going to be the same change we saw. This precedes my time, but when the calculator came around, right? So I wrote about this as well. If there's a person who's doing math problems by hand, which is an important thing to do, to be able to do, of course, from a learning experience standpoint, but like in a practical applied setting, like doing math by hand is going to take you a lot of time. Writing a review of literature for a science paper by going to the library and sifting through books is going to take a long time. And so if you don't use the tools and the technology, calculator, and the internet that are available to you, you will be left behind as a research scientist or as a mathematician, right? Having those skills, though, are important. So in a classroom setting, I think at some basic level, like even in math class, like certain math classes said no calculator allowed, because that purpose of that math class was to make sure you understood how to do long division, you understood how to multiply, and you frankly memorized multiplication tables, because some things you just can't like back into like that. And admittedly, like when I'll go back to when I entered the workforce, being able to do math problems in my head fast and quickly is a exceptional skill that offers me a lot of advantage in the workplace because you can throw 3-4 numbers at me and I'll spit back some semblance of a correct answer. And that provided me an edge in the workforce of saying like, okay, this guy can do it much faster, right? So similarly with AI or calculator or the internet, like folks who start to use and adopt them will start to have an edge of being able to do things faster and still come to the same answer that another person may be coming to, but a couple weeks later or a couple months later. So I think I would say that it is something that, like, at this moment in time, everybody who's engaged on this conversation and this call is at the forefront of shaping how it fits into education or shaping how it fits into healthcare or whatever, wherever you might work. There are others who are scared of it, don't understand it, and I would say, yeah, it'll hit them like a wave, and they will be the late adopters then at that point as well. So being an early adopter just means that then you can shape how it kind of flows, ebbs and flows out of your life or out of your profession, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And it makes me think too, in education, we talk a lot about in the last 20 years, we talked about how we're preparing kids for jobs that don't exist, right? And what does that mean? And this kind of existential crisis. But hearing you talk too, it made me think, not only we're preparing kids for jobs that don't exist, we're also preparing them for workflows that don't yet exist, right? I mean, it's not, at least these jobs, you're going to be an SEO specialist. There was some expectation of what that would look like, even though the content itself was so new. The content might change, but also how you go about actually producing. And that's the other thing I think is so interesting, going back to your point about being a creative generalist. I think the expectation of what you could produce. I talked to somebody, and he was, I think it was Chris Dede, and he was explaining, you're going to go apply for a marketing campaign or a marketing job, and they're going to expect you to show up with an entire campaign because you can do that. And it's not a matter of, and it better be better than what they can get out for free using just AI, right? So it's, which I actually think full circle for students with dyslexia. I actually think that's the opportunity, because if we can get them, and that's going to be the balance that you mentioned, right? You still have to do some things by hand because that's how you learn, right? So how do we make sure you still have this foundational knowledge, but then the way in which we measure and the expectations that we have for people, I think will be so much more reflective of actual work and actual productivity. And I think that's a huge advantage for kids that don't have fine traditional academic success and standardized tests.
I would also just say, I think historically the education system has solved for a very specific type of student. And you mentioned dyslexic students, but I've also heard like they're differently abled, right? Like it doesn't mean that it's a different ability. Right. And unfortunately, our educational system has been structured for a specific ability. And so, as we mentioned with neural nets and how artificial intelligence was trying to be forced fit into the way that we process information, maybe that's not the best way to do it. Maybe it's using LLMs because it's a different ability or different capability of coming to the same thing. So I think I especially am incredibly excited about AI, because now for teachers, differently abled students are able to learn in their specific modality or in their own specific way, in the way that speaks to them, is best for them. Whereas, I mean, when I was going through kind of my early years and primary years in education, it was just like, you have to hit these things, and if you're not hitting them, you get a C or you get a B or whatever. Now, I would say that some of the smartest people I know, frankly, are slightly neurodivergent, and they have an incredible capability to see a problem in a fully different way, in a creative way, to use that word again. And that provides them the edge, the distinction to actually innovate in a way that I'm excited about it as a venture capitalist, to say, let's put capital against these guys. It is those individuals. It's not the standardized test person who performs really well in the ACT or the SAT that ends up kind of changing the world. It's the individual who sees the world differently because they've had to see it differently, whether through their own abilities or through their own life experience, and finding a different way of doing things, and that creativity giving them that edge. And if it's applied in entrepreneurship, I can sure as heck tell you I probably will get excited about it. But if it's applied in art, that artist is going to speak in such a different way that they may find a large audience, right? So I want to just hone in on that point. Like, dyslexia doesn't necessarily mean it's a crutch. It is actually a different ability. And frankly, our education system, some schools have done a fantastic job of tuning to that. Others on the public school side have not, and they just cannot, because again, they have to serve the majority of students or the mass amount of standard students that they see.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that so much. And I love to hear that some of the smartest people are, some degree of neurodivergent. Yeah, I completely, and to your point, I think that to me is the most exciting part of this for education, is being able to just customize to a level for all kids, not, because honestly, we can do that for kids that have access to certain things and, tuition-based schools and all these things, right, that allow, but for kids that may not have that privilege or have that opportunity to deliver the same, talk about a productivity boost. We're suddenly we potentially won't lose as many kids to the system. And what could that even mean for our generalized, what they could contribute and, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
I mean, we see in higher education this a la carte model, at least in certificate-based learning or even community colleges, where it's like shorter timelines for specific skills and capabilities. And what I'll say is, on the workforce side, I know we wanted to get there as well, but I don't necessarily look for a specific degree program anymore. I look for those specific skills and capabilities. So if an individual is a fantastic data visual person, or is a fantastic designer or software developer, whatever, those skills and capabilities you start to see are now becoming even more prevalent in the workforce hiring side of things, with freelance platforms like TopTal or Upwork, or there's a number of other ones. But the point there is, it's skills and capability based hiring versus just degree and program based hiring in many roles now. And so AI provides you that ability to develop those skills and skills in a unique way, and potentially then track to those jobs as well. That right now, those jobs, what they look like and how they work, we don't know. That'll shake out in a few years, but where educators can be exceptional. And if I leave anything with everybody here on the call, is ensure creativity and ensure Socratic thinking and questioning in a student's experience, because that becomes their strongest, most powerful thing as a creative generalist. Those questions and that creativity is what makes them super different and super exceptional in wherever they apply themselves.
I love that, and I love to hear kind of from your seat as a venture capitalist, as kind of finance guy, but creativity and questioning, right? The importance of that, because we often think that's kind of these soft skills that won't get you to where you are now, and so I think that's so helpful to hear. And we're almost out of time, but hearing you talk, also going back full circle, this idea of convergence, right? There's this amazing technologies that might all be coming together at the same time. What could that mean? Hearing you talk about kind of skills more so than degree or content expertise, it's going to be interesting to see in higher ed this convergence of unsustainable costs and potentially less demanding in degrees themselves, right? So what could that even look like in terms of in the long term in higher ed, and what we're doing, and instead of spending $125,000 plus on a 4-year degree, fascinating.
I mean, again, it goes to the point of like, those degree programs probably have like a very specific line of expertise that they're trying to develop, and the cost was fair at a certain point. I think it probably will go down just in terms of one, of course, the priorities of making sure we educate our workforce, but then two, with now teachers being more empowered and more able to scale themselves as an individual. A student doesn't necessarily, like, if office hours is the limiter on a college program, now a teacher can say upload all of their lectures and all of their thinking into an AI that's containerized, that's within the university grounds or the systems. And students can now just be like, hey, I actually don't understand this, and ask the question to the AI equivalent of that teacher, because all those lectures are already in that data set. And that AI can then also bridge to that student's own learning journey. So now where, say, I had to go to office hours like every week or every 2 weeks or whatever, and it's like very cumbersome, I can do this at a click of a button. And so my cycle of learning is much, much, much faster. It doesn't mean 4 years. It means 2 years, maybe. And now also there's a bunch of classes that say I don't need for that specific skill, right? So if I'm going to become a data visual person, I don't need the theory of a specific computer science coding language. I just need to know how to design data, like dashboards and stuff. And maybe if I want to expand and grow into learning about the theory of a specific software coding language, I can do that later. Like I can already start to take what I'm learning in my curricular experience and actually applying it into real world. And I'll say this, like I spend a lot of time in DC, so Secretary Raimondo actually has pointed this to our higher education system and saying, like, classroom-based learning is not greater than practical applied learning, meaning experience-based learning or apprenticeship learning. Classroom is not greater, they are equal. And so universities should and absolutely value some of those joint experiences where, say, if a student took a 3-month data visualization class and then they spent the next 3 months building dashboards for a high school or for a product software company, then that should be counted as part of their learning journey. And that student has the option of like, okay, you've mastered this skill, where else do you want to go, right? And finding both the job and the classroom experience kind of going hand in hand.
Yeah, I love that. I totally agree. It makes me think, and we're at time, but it makes me think, this is not mine, but I heard someone talk once about how that idea of classroom-based learning versus kind of more experiential and actually doing. His example is that most, kind of in a traditional Western, certainly American public school education and even private, we're going to learn about volcanoes 4 or 5 times. We're going to, but we'll never learn how a car works. And yet all of us will spend all of our time in a car and most likely never encounter a volcano. But there's this prestige associated with my knowledge of volcanoes that somehow, though it has no practical use whatsoever, is better than me knowing about a car. So we're coming to a close. If I could ask you real quick, because we have a question in the chat. Would you define, when you say Socratic method and Socratic questioning, would you define that? How you refer to that when you're referring to that, what that means?
I think it's like, I define it as just if there's a statement made, students ask the questions behind it to get to that statement. So if it's asking the set of questions and the journey of how those questions stack up to get to that statement and confirming its validity or not confirming it. And in certain cases, it may not make sense. Like I will say readily in like an English class, maybe it doesn't make sense there. But in a science class, it could make sense to say that why are 2 atoms kind of combining? Like what is the purpose of those 2 atoms combining? Or why are 2 electrons engaging in this way? I think without getting into this, but quantum sciences, I am floored that in my educational career at elementary school, nobody told me about spooky action at a distance. That is an actual theorem from Einstein that nobody explained. And that's the upward and downward spin of certain electrons. That is the underlying basis of quantum theory and quantum computing now. But the point there is that a student may have asked, well, why don't we know if an electron spins up or down? Then that you could have said, well, it's an unknown space of how traditional physics thinks about, physics and chemistry think about atoms. In another application with quantum theory, they actually have XYZ thing and they could branch it into spooky action at a distance. What that does for a student then is it actually expands their learning horizon in a greater way. And the statement being like, we don't know plus or minus spin of an electron or the spin of an electron, that statement being, and then the questions that follow, allowing for kind of one confirmation of that statement, but then 2 also of other areas to potentially explore if there's not a firm belief of like, we don't know the spin. Then at least the student can be like, okay, I think I need to explore this other thing.
So I was about to say, I'm now going to Google spooky quantum, but I'm going to go to AI. Actually, I'm not going to go to Google.
Reaction to distance. Teach it. A lot of teachers, October, Halloween time, like that should be there.
That's great. That's awesome. All right. So in our last minute or so, first, thank you so much. This was amazing. Amazing. Yeah. Are there 3 things that you would leave us with to read, to watch, to think about, to listen to? Could be about AI, could be about anything.
I mentioned Khan Migo. If you haven't tried it, you should definitely try it. I think it's a very helpful application for educators. I mentioned the Walton Family Foundation's AI survey for educators. That foundation does a lot of work with educators across the US. That's another fantastic resource in terms of what to read. And then I think if you wish to venture into hey, what are the other sectors that are going to be critically important? I'll plug in the National Security Commission's report on artificial intelligence. NSCAI is another third one. It's a little bit more kind of in the weeds, but at least will help share, other technologies like semiconductors have a huge implication on how AI will kind of supersede our ability to think or whatever. I think that could be another one. Of course, it's painted under the tone of national security, but I think if you read it, it could be a helpful one as well.
That's great. And we will, when we post this on the website, we'll make sure we link to all those things. So Thank you so much. This was remarkable. So much fun. 8 a.m. and I'm all energized. So thank you. This was so great.
No, of course. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope to find more conversations. If folks have questions, they feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn or Josh or whatever.
That's great. Thank you. We've already had a request on the chat for round 2, so we might be coming back to it. So thank you so much. Have a great day. Have a great summer. It was incredible.
Thanks, Josh.